to sow or not to sow? That is the question.
You do know the play is Hamlet, not ham acting. Also, as an English graduate, I must point out that actually Yorick is not in the to be or not to be scene. Different scene. Different.
Everyone's a critic. Join me and we'll talk about that. January. Should you sow? Should you not sow? What are the things to think about? Hello. So what we're going to do today, guys, is we're going to demystify it, and I'm going to say, grab a cup of tea and sit and stop for just now, and we'll have a chat about, can you sow your seeds? Should you sow your seeds? And either side, yes or no, what are the positives and the minuses, so that you guys have got all the info you need for you to make your own decision. And I'm going to tell you about my experience, because for the last 2 years, I have started my seeds off early in January and February. For the whole 10 years before that, however, I didn't. And luckily, I have lots of video footage that I can share with you guys to show you the differences, and I'll talk to you about my experience. So let's start with the 3 reasons that you'll usually hear for people starting seeds in January and February, and it is this. Number 1 is because they are sowing seeds for the type of plants that have a very long growing season, and they can't provide that naturally for those plants. So in order to get the absolute best out of those plants, and let's be honest, the biggest harvest you can get, they're starting their seeds early and trying to cheat Mother Nature. So that's the first reason. The second reason is similar, but it is more about plants that do happily grow in your environment, but you can sow them early to get a jump start on things. Now, these tend to be plants that are relatively hardy in your grown environment, which means they will cope fine and they don't need any extra help. But if you get them going early, when you do plant them out into the garden in spring, they will take off like a rocket because they've already got that little bit ahead, and you get a jump start on your season. The third reason, and I think this is the most important one to acknowledge, is simply because people at this time of year are just so desperate for a little bit of gardening that they just want to try sowing some seeds just to get that feel-good factor. It doesn't mean that they're trying to be clever or smart, and they're accepting that things might not be perfect, things might not work, but they're just getting that little bit of happiness out of sowing their seeds. And that's okay. So basically, I had 2 disasters with the seedlings, both of them 100% my fault and avoidable. Now, as I said, guys, I have been sowing seeds early for the last 2 years so that I could get a bit of experience of what it was like and what was involved. And it means I can now tell you guys about that experience, and I will tell you what my decisions have been on doing that and what I'm doing this year. And it is like this. There are minuses to starting your seeds off this early, especially things like your peppers and your tomatoes, which are the most common ones we're talking about at this time of year. And the very first one is, it can actually be really difficult to get seeds to germinate through the colder months. Okay? Now, it's not to say it's impossible, but you may find that you don't get the same successful germination rates when it's generally cooler. Your soil is generally cooler. It's just not the perfect climate for them. And even when you do get that germination, number 2, it can be quite hard going to keep those little seedlings healthy and alive and the best they can be. To do that, you generally need to provide them with heat and extra light. Now, I can't grow stuff on a sunny window ledge in my house because we just don't have a space like that I can grow on that gives enough light. let's be honest, at this time of year, there's not as much light as you will find in spring and summer, by a long shot. So you're usually having to supplement it. But, and I count this as number 3, we're tying it on to the whole healthy thing, but you find that because there's not enough light, you get really leggy little seedlings. Now, the thing is, once those little seedlings are leggy, no matter what you see in these hack videos, you can't make it short again. Nothing is going to make it get smaller again. But okay, things like your tomatoes, you can actually, when you pot them on, you can actually bury them deeper in the soil and they'll do okay. But that's not the case with all plants. So something to be aware of is that you need to give them perfect environment with heat and light. Number 4 then is the big one for the moment. I've mentioned that when you're starting off these little seedlings early, you need to provide that heat and light that they need. Now, that could be that you're growing them in the house, so you've got that warmth of the house, but you may still need to provide extra light depending on your situation. So the first year then, I grew all my little seedlings on in the house until they were too big for the house anymore. The second year, I grew them out here in the greenhouse because I've got this big heated propagator that I can use and I've got extra lights for it. But that all comes at a cost. Whether it's the cost of the equipment to do this or it's the cost of running your energy to do it, which is something we're all very aware of this year. There is a cost involved and it is something to think about. Now, number 5 then is one that I think is super important to be aware of. And I will use tomatoes as an example because your tomatoes will grow incredibly quickly. Trust me on this one. And before long, you're going to have huge tomato plants that you're going to struggle for space. And you're going to want to get them out into your greenhouse or the garden or wherever it is they're going to go. But you've started early, so it's not the environment for them yet. Now, there's one thing you could do, and it's a bit of a running joke on the social media circle, and it gets called the tomato hokey cokey, because during the day, you take your tomatoes out and you put them into your unheated greenhouse. But it's too cold at night, so you take them back indoors again, and you have to do this every day. And it does become a chore. It adds extra risks of plants being damaged and what have you. So you do need to think about space. Now, on that note, I'm going to mention frost dates and growing times in a little bit. So if you're wondering about that, hang with me, we'll mention that in a second. Now, the last, number 6, the point that's a minus about doing this, goes hand in hand with the fact that a lot of us were just starting these seeds off early because it was just a feel-good thing. We just desperately want to get gardening again. But here's the thing, I found that it was awesome doing that and I loved it, but it did mean there was an awful lot of work for me to keep those little plants healthy and be looking after them. And it got to the point where it was a real stress for me to be doing that because it's more work than it would be later on in the year. So the truth is, you can start your seeds in January and February. It does work. And you will get earlier harvests. But here is one of those things that you don't really hear people talking about. And folk were quite shocked when I mentioned it last year. The tomatoes that I started in February with heat and light gave me my first tomatoes in May. First sun gold of the season. Which right now you're like, whoa, that's amazing. I also was getting ripe peppers well before everyone else. And that's awesome. But there's always a but. That meant that I also stopped getting my tomatoes and peppers earlier than everyone else. So in, say, late August, when everyone else is excited about their bumper harvests, mine was dwindling away to nearly nothing because plants have a finite life cycle. So Swings and roundabouts, folk, pluses and minuses. But I think that's a really good one to think about. Now, here's the thing. I said to you that this is a new thing for me. I've been doing this experiment over the last 2 years. But before then, for about 10 years before then, I didn't sow my tomatoes or pepper seeds until mid-March. Carrots and lots of tomatoes and some peppers and some chillies. And I sowed them in my unheated greenhouse with no help from any heat or extra light. And they did awesome. I'm not going to lie to you. The only difference is about how early you get a harvest. That is the only difference I found. The plants, you will hear people talk about how quickly the plants will catch up, and they will. I found, and again, just as we're chatting here, I'll show you some footage of this is my greenhouse, say in the end of April when I'm potting on those little March sown tomatoes and peppers, or looking at it in June, or again in August. And you can see that those plants are awesome and strong and tall and healthy and giving me harvests. So essentially, if I don't need those early harvests, if I'm happy to accept the amount of harvests I get, and actually I got really good harvests, then I don't really need to get them started early. So guys, this year I am not going to start my peppers or tomatoes in January or February. I'm going to wait till mid-March. So for those of you who are doing Grow Along with Eli, so you can grow along with me, even if you guys don't have heat and light to do this. And we're also going to keep up the growing outdoors in Scotland tomatoes, and I'm going to start them off a little bit later on in April. And here's when I said to you about frost dates. So, okay guys, this is a question that came to me last year and I saved it because I thought it was awesome. And it is this. You will hear lots of folk online telling you to sow your seeds 6 weeks before your final frost date, 8 weeks before your final frost date. The seed packet or the catalogue might say 10 weeks or 12 weeks before your final frost date. So what is your final frost date and which of those is correct? Okay, so if you don't know your final frost date, it is super important if you want to grow any of your plants outdoors. Because if your plants aren't hardy, they will not cope with a frost. So it's good to know when to expect that last frost so you can put stuff out afterwards. So what to do when we're finished up with today's video, have a Google and go and look for a final frost date map. And that way you can find out what it is in your area. But be aware, a final frost date is generally an average, okay? So it could actually be as much as 2 weeks later than that date. So I always give myself that extra 2 weeks just to be careful. You want to know about how your plants will cope with temperatures, because here in my garden, even in June, it's still very cold at night, far too cold for large tomato plants to be out there. So again, you decide whether you start 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks before your final frost date by determining how big you want those little plants to be before you put them outside. So guys, I know that we will have people who want to sow their seeds early and people who will want to wait. And I'm going to cater to both of you. So if you want to start your seeds off early, but you want a bit more info about it and you want to see what that's like, these videos here are for you guys. This is the stuff that I did when I started my peppers and tomatoes off in January and February. Those of you that are waiting till March, this is my unheated greenhouse videos from before I tried to beat Mother Nature. Something for everyone. And as always, I will keep you guys involved in everything I'm doing and I'll keep you up to date on it all. See you folks!